sow more than you really need, there's often ways to use those little seedlings in the meantime. But when you're ordering your seeds, think about how much space you have and how much space you're willing to devote to each variety. Do I need 10 different types of squash? Or is that going to take over my whole garden and then I won't have space for anything else? There's a lot of jargon in the in the catalogs, but do try to notice if you have the right growing conditions for the stuff that you're going to be planting. If you have to start if your tomato seeds, if you don't have a long season outside for growing tomatoes, you probably want to start those things indoors, and that's true for most of our favorite winter or our favorite summer vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, most of the squash you can direct sow, but we have a short growing season, so if you can get a head start by sowing things inside, you can really get ahead of the season. But if you don't have a lot of space inside, and especially if you don't have a greenhouse or a cold frame or something like that inside, it's really easy for your seeds to start coming up and stretching, and they don't have enough light and air movement, and it's still warm in your house, but it's 25 degrees outside. You can't transplant them outside. So if I started all those tomatoes in February, and I'd really like to transplant them now, but it's still, because they're starting to stretch and it's February 31st, you got to consider that the weather might not be good for tomatoes until the end of May. And so you just wasted your seed, basically. And so if you germinate all this seed, you can't really stop it.
So is there a guide for when you start planting seeds indoors?
Yeah, they're
ready at the right time.
Tons of guides. Most of the seed catalogs will have guides. We have a guide in there on our seed rack it's an Ed Hume guide that's kind of based on the Farmer's Almanac guide. There's a really good guide published by a local organization called Tilth Alliance. They're based out of Seattle, and so they've got regionalized Maritime Western Washington guides. A lot of the guides, though, are still you got to take with some consideration because the winters aren't the same year to year. It feels like we should be starting seeds now, but then they're saying it might be 20 degrees tomorrow or something. So it's a little bit challenging. Yeah, this is a good guide. I think this one's pretty fun. This garden almanac, Ed Hume's Garden Almanac Guide. It's a month-by-month seed guide, and this is from Western Washington too. They base theirs off the moon calendar, which I think is very fun. I'll talk a little bit about that too later. So anyway, as far as making choices on what kind of seed you're going to get, that's all very personal, and everybody's going to have a different thing that they want. And the cool thing is the plant world is so big, and there's so many seed catalogs you can get now. You can order seed from all over the world, and a lot of it will grow right here in Western Washington because we have a pretty mild climate. And a really cool thing about gardening is that it's a great way to intimately connect with your place, and a great way to participate in some cultural history. So if your family was from Europe, you're probably growing plants that were from Europe. If your family was from Vietnam, you can probably even grow a lot of plants that are from Vietnam. Africa, South America, whatever, there's a lot of plants that you will recognize that will kind of tie you to your legacy of how you got here and help you kind of reconnect with that. So if you're curious in your own cultural history, try growing some things that were important to the cultural history of your people, and share that information with others. And that's like a great your garden becomes a cultural resource in that regard. So find the seed that meets your style, and there's no right or wrong for that. I'm not even so militant. I'm not militant about GMO stuff or whatever, but I'm going to say that if that's your style, you keep gardening. Just keep gardening, and you might grow out of it.
Sam?
Yes.
Is there a particular seed company that is good for this area? Like Ed Hume?
So Ed Hume is a good. We have a couple on our seed rack. Most of the stuff we sell on our seed rack is pretty good for our area. Most of the seed companies, if you're buying, are going to have regional availabilities as well. So even if it's a national seed brand like Livingston Seed, they're probably going to stock our seed shelf with stuff that's regionally suitable. But I'm not going to advocate for any one particular seed grower over another, and I will say that most seed sources are resellers. So Ed Hume isn't growing all his seed. Territorial is growing some, but they're not growing all that seed themselves. They hire individuals all across the country to grow seed, and then they receive that seed and divide it up, package it up, and resell it. So that's a big reason why there's going to be sometimes seed that's not true to type, even if it's coming from a reputable seed sourcer, seed vendor, because they have different seed growers year to year. One thing most people don't realize is we could all probably be seed growers for mainstream seed companies if we had a production that met the criteria for their products. You know, we could be growing seed and selling it, or at least getting credit for that. So it's another way to kind of participate and make some money if you're thinking about reasons to grow seeds still. Okay, so starting your seeds, there's a lot of ways to go wrong when you're starting your seeds. It should be recognized that if you really want to have success with seed starting, look at what is going on successfully all around you, outside in the garden. If you go outside right now, you'll be seeing germination on little seedlings. It's barely February, but stuff is growing. So if you notice that you've got shotweed already starting to grow, if there's little dandelions already starting to come up, a lot of these cool season weeds have relatives that are favorable garden vegetables to grow. So there's seeds you can be growing basically any time of year, and if you are acknowledging that there's stuff going on out in the garden, learning from those things, making those observations will give us clues on what might do well now for us. So I always have tomatoes coming up in our compost pile, and oftentimes they grow and make fruit. You know, and sometimes they don't start coming up until May or June. And so being patient on some of our seeds, we can get clues on when to start based on what's going on around us, and we can really also gain inspiration or just good reminders, and we can remember that maybe all these weeds coming up, I've got to pull all these weeds, but then what? Something else is going to grow there. So you might as well put something else there that you want to grow, and if the weeds are growing vigorously, no problem growing something there. So there's something for every space, but match the variety to the particular place at the particular time. And so those clues are all around us all the time. And let's see, so what to start is pretty important and when, and we talked about that there's an almanac and there's various publications that can help us navigate that, especially if you're not really experienced and don't just get that feeling in your bones every February that you need to plant your peas, you know, when you see that full moon or new moon or whatever. So the other thing to consider is not everything is going to grow real well. So if I have, let's say, lavender seed, it's a Mediterranean plant, it wants to grow in the Mediterranean, and I'm trying to sow that outside right now. It's not the Mediterranean here. It's not going to do very well. So matching plants that are naturally well suited to your environment, you're going to have more successful germination. That being said, you're also going to have more successful reproduction. The first thing that goes with any plant or any animal, as a matter of fact, when you take it out of its natural environment, is its ability to reproduce. So a lot of seed that's collected even in your home garden from plants that are maybe more exotic is probably going to have a harder time germinating and producing vigorous, true to type seed. So a lot of these things that we really like, that we can grow here successfully, I'm thinking Mediterranean herbs again, thyme, rosemary, lavender, all these things, even mint, might be easier to propagate by other means like cuttings or division or something like that rather than seeds. So consider what you want to grow. There's often a lot of jargon on seed packets, and so it's important to figure out the most important information that should be on every seed packet and surely will not be is a date. And so this has no date anywhere on it. It says it's freshly packed. I guess it does. Freshly packed for 2019. It has a date. that has a date, but this one doesn't. Glockner's seeds, they don't have a date on there anywhere. It has a lot number, so I'd have to call up the company and ask them. This one has a date too. It went as far to give me a month as well. It's good for until October, basically. It's got a date on there. So if your seed packet doesn't have a date, physically write when you received it, so you know. If you don't use all that seed because you don't have space for 40, early girl tomatoes in your garden, you might only want to do 5 and then do some more next year. You can save the seed from year to year sometimes, and you can know if it's maybe still going to be good if you wrote that date on there. Another really important information they don't all put on there is a germination rate. Okay, so that's it. We'll get into that in just a second here, how long they're good for. So another important thing is the germination rate. And so if they print a germination rate on there like this, Hollyhock's Celebrities Mix says it's got a 91% germination rate. That's really good. Livingston isn't going to give me a germination rate. Ed Hume probably isn't going to give me a germination rate. But the germination rate is going to be really important for predicting how many of those seeds to plant, how many of them are actually going to grow, so you don't way overseed more than you need, but you're not really disappointed in a really sparse row that comes up. And so there is a good way to do your own germination test. You can't, I would say, don't ever fully trust the germination rate on the seed packet. If this seed packet got wet or something like that, somewhere along the line, it might not have the same germination rate as their report. And next year, it's definitely not going to have the same germination rate as their report, I would expect. And so to test your own germination, there's a method, just a wet paper towel test. Basically, take a small plate or a little petri dish or something like that and put a piece of paper towel down, moisten the paper towel, put at least 10 seeds on there. The seed companies have to do 200 when they do their tests, but if you put at least 10 down, you'll be able to get some statistics on it. The more the better. And then put another piece of paper towel over the top and keep it moist, but not underwater, just keep it moist and keep it there for at least 3 weeks. And every couple days, count how many have germinated. And if you have really good seed, it's all going to germinate at about the same time. And generally, it germinates the earlier the better, but some seeds might take 3 weeks before they start germinating. So then just observe how well it went. And if you have really erratic germination, like some of them start coming up on the 5th day, and then some of them start coming up on the 12th day, and then a couple more come up on the 20th day, that is not really a good sign for vigor. They really all should be coming up basically when the first seeds start coming up to have the best vigor. The best plants in your garden are going to be from the most vigorous seedlings in your garden, generally speaking. So those earliest, first, most vigorous seeds are going to be the best plants. So even if it's got a 90% germination and half of them aren't vigorous enough to reach maturity, that's not desirable for our purposes either. So a germination test. Anybody done one of these before? Yeah, all right. We've got one, that's really good. So it can be really helpful, especially if you have old seed, because you might not know how long your seed lasts for. And so there's a lot of different types of seed. Some seed saves really well, really easily, and can last a long time. So like squash, you can keep that for like 7 years sometimes, a long time, easy, just in a jar, dry, without losing a lot of vigor. But things like onions, no way. You want to plant those on the first year. There are various charts that exist, maybe even in these almanacs, definitely in this book if you want to see. I'd be happy to lend you this book or to check that out after the class, and you can see some charts related to that. But the different types of seeds are stable for different amounts of time, and things like beans and squash are really easy. Corn is pretty easy, keeps really well for a long time. But things that typically want to germinate right after they fall off the plant, especially most of the tropical plants, fruits and things like that, they don't save well. Things that dry out and need to fully dry and form a hard seed coat, and are able to lose most of their water and still live, those save well. It's just a kind of it is very important to consider how long you can save your seed. If you want to extend the life of your seeds, the best thing to do is to make sure they are completely dry. And so sometimes even coming out of a seed packet, they've got a little more moisture than can tolerate going in a freezer. But if you have seed that's pretty much perfectly dry, you can seal it up and put it in a freezer and store it almost indefinitely. And we've heard about like the seed bank in Norway that's under ice, that they're holding all these heirloom or wild varieties so we don't lose them to extinction. That's the same principle that can happen in your freezer. But I'm going to say the best way to hold seed year after year is to grow it and collect it. And so that's going to keep it most vigorous, and it's going to keep it adapting to you, and keep it adapting to the changing climate too. So growing out your seed and saving it and using it every year is probably the best approach. But nobody wants to grow the same thing year after year after year, and sometimes you might not want to grow that mammoth pumpkin, but you might want to grow it next year. So put it in the freezer, forget about it till next year, do a germination test in the spring if you've got enough material, and then see how it goes. Okay, seed starting. So that's germination test technology. There's tons of different types of technology that are available for growing seeds, and some of it's really sophisticated. I used to work at a greenhouse where we had what we called a germ chamber. Our germination chamber was about a room the size of a shipping box that we would roll racks into, and it had fluorescent lights and misters. We kept it at 80 degrees and 100% humidity, and we'd roll stuff in, and as soon as we'd start seeing little leaves, cotyledons starting to crack, as soon as we'd start seeing our growth on our seeds, we'd have to roll them out of there and get them into a kind of a greenhouse for hardening off, and it was pretty technical with thermostats and high energy use and all that stuff. But you definitely don't need that. You can simulate that kind of environment with something as simple as one of these little trays with this little plastic dome that goes over the top. Basically, if you take one of those and especially put it on a little heat mat like this, something that's going to keep warm, keep your seeds, between 70 and 80 degrees, you're going to get pretty, hopefully rapid germination for most of our favorite seeds to grow, and in a pretty controlled environment. But like I say, when you start getting germination in here, it's really important at that time to start making some changes and take the plastic lid off, let the leaves start to breathe, get them into more suitable growing conditions, into soil that has fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. But as far as for germination, these are really appropriate for germination.
To start, do you need good light?
So that's a really good question. A lot of seedlings, most of our seedlings that we like to grow should be covered with a little bit of soil, and they don't want light for germination. But as soon as the seed germinates, it wants light. So that's the point in getting it into a bright spot under a light, or into a greenhouse where there's full sun or something, because if they don't have light, those seedlings are going to start stretching and looking for light. If you've ever turned over a bucket in the lawn or whatever that had something growing under it, those are going to be all pale and taller than all the stuff that was around it. So light is super important, and if you just leave them in a dark, humid, warm conditions, you're going to have dampening off happening. You're basically creating conditions that favor rot and don't favor plant growth. It's more like a compost pile at that point, and so your seedlings are going to grow up, and they're going to wilt and fall over and have a little brown rot right at the stem, and they're not going to come back. So to avoid dampening off, as soon as you get germination, pull those seeds into a growing environment that transitions them into your garden conditions.